Bé, benvingudes i benvinguts en aquest seminari, el Seminari Les Cultures del Turisme, de la gènesi al fenomen global, que realitzem en el marc del projecte Ciutat i Turisme, que està endegat pel Centre de Cultura Contemporània de Barcelona, amb l'impuls, amb tot el suport de l'Ajuntament de Barcelona i la Diputació de Barcelona. Aquest seminari és una de les primeres iniciatives que es desenvolupen al marc d'aquest projecte, el projecte Ciutat i Turisme, que té un programa a anys vista on es desplegaran diverses activitats, diverses propostes centrades a pensar, a repensar, a remirar-nos el turisme contemporani amb un especial focus al turisme urbà. Bé, el Seminari Les Cultures del Turisme, que iniciem aquest matí i que continua demà, reuneix a diverses veus expertes que afronten l'anàlisi del turisme des d'un punt de vista afrontant un debat públic acadèmic, però també polític i econòmic, com no pot ser d'una altra manera, amb l'objectiu d'avançar cap a una reflexió que sigui àmplia, profunda, crítica i útil. Volem que tot plegat sigui profitós, que ens generi passos endavant per pensar i gestionar i viure en aquest turisme, en aquesta esfera del turisme global. Per dir-ho d'alguna manera, l'esperit del seminari no és o no hauria de ser només el de crear controvèrsia, sinó el d'analitzar el turisme partint de la controvèrsia, donant per feta la controvèrsia. I això vol dir, entre d'altres qüestions, sortir de les zones de confort, per tant, desmantellant tòpics, prejudicis, essencialismes, perquè quan pensem al turisme molt sovint se'ns escapen moltes idees tancades i essencialistes, evitant també discursos molt sobrecentrats en les xifres o la dimensió econòmica, precisament, i per tant afrontar el debat, l'anàlisi del turisme a partir de nous paradigmes i nous debats, assumint una mirada del fenomen transnacional, que ens permeti connectar casos de Barcelona i més enllà de Barcelona, òbviament, i observant com es conformen i com es globalitzen les cultures del turisme. És sobre això que volem parlar, sobre cultures del turisme i, entre d'altres qüestions, això vol dir parlar dels discursos, dels significats globals del turisme, dels subjectes dins les masses, del mimetisme dins la llibertat, dels turistes dins les ciutats, de la cultura produïda i transformada per i per als turistes, de les resistències i contranarratives, en fi, de totes les derivades, complexitats, problemàtiques que es deriven del fenomen del turisme. Aquest seminari també té el propòsit, en la mesura que sigui possible, d'avançar cap a una nova agenda de recerca i de reflexió sobre el turisme contemporani. Bé, i avui comencem amb una taula que precisament posa el focus en els processos de mercantilització de la cultura, és a dir, com s'exposa, com es produeix la cultura a mans del turisme. I en breus minuts, Hazel Andrews, Noel Salazar, Fabiola Mancinelli i Konstantina Zerva ens provocaran amb aquestes i altres qüestions. Agraïm molt especialment als ponents de les tres taules, també Marco Déramo, Alicia Fuentes, Cristina Ribas, Pau Obrador, Raquel Huete, Francesc Muñoz, doncs el repte d'haver vingut, el compromís d'estar aquí, de parlar amb ganes i de no deixar-nos indiferents. Això és el que esperem i el que agraïm. Gràcies també a totes les persones que esteu aquí. La prova evident que parlar del turisme té interès. Esperem que les jornades siguin profitoses, cadascú des del seu lloc que ocupa. Voldríem fer un reconeixement públic a dues persones fantàstiques, l'Elisabet Goula, la Mireia Manjón, del Centre de Cultura Contemporània, sense les quals aquest seminari no hauria anat a bon port. I bé, finalment, i en nom d'en Francesc Muñoz i meu, en qualitat de comissaris del projecte, volem agrair al Centre de Cultura Contemporània i també a l'Ajuntament de Barcelona, a la Diputació, haver-nos fet confiança i haver-nos permès treballar també amb tant goig i amb tanta llibertat. Per tant, gràcies i benvinguts.
Bé, simplement per acabar de reblar la introducció, avançar-vos els continguts de la taula de demà i no us perdeu la conferència del Marco Déramo aquesta tarda, que serà realment interessant. Demà, avui començarem situant la qüestió de les cultures del turisme i demà explorem en dos camins diferents la gènesi d'aquestes cultures i l'anatomia dels impactes sobre les cultures no turístiques, sobre el món que habitem. Per acabar diríem que crec que és una reflexió que hem compartit bastant amb la Saïda durant aquests mesos i també amb la Mireia i l'Elisabet Goula, El turisme no és una part separada de la societat actual, és una part contextual, encara diria més, és com un mirall en el qual ens veiem reflectits i per tant en aquest seminari intentem integrar els discursos sobre turisme i cultura en un marc molt més ampli per veure de treure l'aigua clara de com podem plantejar aquesta activitat que és molt més que una activitat econòmica, és molt més que una activitat econòmica, és una màquina que crea cultura contínuament i com això s'incardina amb tota una sèrie de continguts socials i culturals que ens haurien de permetre a entendre el món que hem creat, perquè ens agradi o no és el que tenim i el món que podem crear en el futur. Ho deixem aquí. Moltes gràcies per la vostra assistència. Esperem que sigui un seminari interessant, no tinc cap dubte, i profitós. Ara passem a la primera taula. Moltes gràcies.
Sí, vale. Molt bé. Molt bon dia a tothom. Jo sóc la Konstantina Zerva, professora de màrqueting de la Universitat de Girona, de la Facultat de Turisme. Primer de tot volia agrair al Centre de Cultura Contemporània de Barcelona per aquesta invitació i per estar aquí, per aquesta oportunitat de parlar del tema de turisme, de la mercantilització de la cultura. M'agradaria primer de tot presentar les persones que hi són aquí avui en aquest primer seminari, en aquest primer debat. Per una banda, i comencem amb la doctora Hazel Andrews de la Liverpool John Moores University, que és una antropòloga responsable del primer estudi etnogràfic sobre els turistes britànics que viatgen en paquets de vacances a Mallorca. Tot seguit tenem el doctor Noel Salazar de la Catholic University of Leuven, a Bèlgica, un antropòleg que ha investigat com es construeixen els imaginaris globals dels destins turístics, amb casos d'estudis a Yogyakarta, en Indonèsia, i Arusha, en Tanzània. I finalment m'agradaria presentar la doctora Fabiola Mancinelli, professora de la Universitat de Barcelona, antropòloga que ha abordat la relació entre identitat, turisme i viatge, especialment en relació amb la figura dels expats en el sud-est asiàtic. Jo sóc l'única no antropòloga en aquest debat, per tant faré el que puc per aprendre molt i molt. Només volia comunicar que com que la majoria, estem aquí, tenim molta gent internacional, per tant farem aquesta primera introducció i el debat en anglès, però sí que n'hi ha servei de traducció, per tant espero que tot sigui fàcil de seguir. Bé, parlant ara des de la meva perspectiva, passo en anglès. During the last few years, what we have seen and what we are seeing as an evolution is that instead of enjoying the fruits of successful tourism strategies, basically what we are looking at is a mismatch between a destination's culture and a culture destined for tourists. Historically, cultural projection to the foreigner based on the pride in local identity has heavily invested in enhancing the staging of culture, aiming to portray what is beautiful, what is unique, what is authentic, under the presumption that we already know and understand what tourists wish to see. On the other hand, culture does not exist in a static state. By definition, it is evolving. So it travels one way or another as people who are connected with it move around the world and share it. It is no secret that many famous historical museums, by definition, are basically a normalized establishment of where cultures are where they're not supposed to be. So someone else's culture becomes the storytelling of another destination. Or people who are constantly on the move, learning foreign cultures, and when they go back home, they adapt part of them to their own routine, which in time can become part of a local culture. As a result, culture provides more material for communication over time as it expands. Yet culture has been regarded both as a victim of the tourist gaze, as well as a victim of local detachment, resulting from a lack of interest or engagement among newer generations. The bits and pieces of culture that are carefully chosen to show to the visitor could sometimes alienate it from its complete identity. For example, I work and I have the luck to work in the Faculty of Tourism of the University of Girona, which is a very beautiful building. It was a monastery, it was founded in 1253. It has 2 cloisters, a Romanesque, a Gothic one. It's a beautiful place to be. I invite you to come. And many years ago, after the last 25 years now, it is a university. But what has happened in between that time? What exactly is the story of that building? In that building lived Nicolau Aymeric, one of the most cruel inquisitors of our history. He's the author of the Directorium Inquisitorum, which basically is a manual that explains what is witchcraft and how to detect witches. And that had its purpose, of course, in that time. It was a military headquarters. It was the seat of the military government until 1985. And then it became what it is now, an academic institution. Yet when visitors go and see that building, whether it is by luck or whether because they have to visit our students, etc., this is not a story we are told. We go from the monastery to the university. There is part of that history, and many, many years of that history we are not told. Why is that hidden from us? Why is that considered as part of the story we are not supposed to know? Why shouldn't we appreciate how a place evolves in time and the bad moments that make us better? Usually we say that the mistakes make us better people. What are those mistakes? Let's be precise. How do we come here? In my field of investigation, which basically is dark tourism, not a very common way of seeing tourism, I have observed that the systematic creation of tourist narratives regarding classic recipes of how to project local culture has resulted in a lack of expertise in communicating the negative side of a local culture, within a fear of attracting fewer tourists. The beautiful part of a culture's history, it's decorated, it's enhanced, it's magnified, while the not so beautiful or even the ugly one, many times it's silenced or romanticized to fit the purpose of a storytelling. In my investigation, I have observed that the sector often appears numbed, uncomfortable, and uncertain when addressing the challenge of crafting narratives that may offend, hurt, or alienate visitors. Often under the presumption that we fully understand what is provoking such emotions from visitors to visitors. So I know indeed dark tourism is an extreme case, but the same unease is found when it comes to mentioning some negative parts of our culture, even small ones. And I have two specific examples of my personal observation. In a recent tour I did in Gaudi's Casa Milà, the guide mentioned at a random moment of the tour that the house was actually 100% financed by Milà's wife, Roger Segimon, but was named Milà because he was the husband. That comment was the one that created most reactions from the tour, probably because it fits the contemporary discussion about women standing, etc., or not. However, in another tour that I did in the city of Berlin, the tour guide, after making some typical jokes in the beginning to break the ice, the first thing that she said is that the children in Germany, when they go to school and they do history classes, what they learn is that they are the bad guys of the story, and they have to find a way to deal with it. And that changed completely the narrative and the entire experience and the attention of the people to the rest of the tour. So I guess that the moment you choose to say something negative, or the reality could change probably the experience or not. But it is something we should probably reflect on. Let's zoom out from my personal experience now. And at a strategic level, we are moving away from mass tourism. When we say that a lot, we would like not to have mass tourism, even though we end up having mass tourism. And we are trying to shift toward our focus and attention to post-Fordist tourism. We are trying to think about ways to make the touristic experiences more personalized, to create more engagement. We speak constantly about authenticity, and there are many interpretations of what authenticity is, most of them quite valid. We speak about niche markets, especially in my marketing classes, I focus a lot on that. We even try to consider how to revalorize marginalized territories. So when it comes to communicate culture, we could ask, are we being too post-Fordist in our effort to personalize and engage, while falling short of post-Fordism principles when it comes to including the marginalized or even confronting the uncomfortable or ugly aspects of how we became the grand culture we celebrate today? Is it possible that a less romanticized version of a cultural front stage could be seen as a sincere form of anti-marketing that could affect expectations and cultural experiences in a different manner? And finally, if the cultural projection is not intended to impress, but to inform, would the tourist gaze be less harmful? So these are some basic questions I would like to start this debate. And now I would like to pass the word to our first professor, Hazel Andrews.
Okay, good morning.
First of all, I'd like to thank the organisers of this panel and CCCB for inviting me to take part in this seminar and discussion. I've been researching tourists visiting Palma Nova and Magaluf in Mallorca since 1997. I have done this by way of participant observation, which means that I have spent time of various lengths living among the tourists of these two resorts. My talk today is based on this research. So the title of this panel is Touristified Gaze, from Cultural Tourism to Commodification of Culture. And the question that I've been asked to address is, how does what is local, singular and symbolic for a community come to be a resource to be consumed by globetrotter tourists? First, I have to address the issue of the idea of cultural tourism. For me, culture is about what people do. It is the practice of everyday life. It is not separate from us. I tend to agree with one of the early anthropologists, E.B. Tyler, that, to quote, culture is a complex whole which includes knowledge, belief, art, morals, law, custom, and any other capabilities and habits acquired by people as a member of society. And also the cultural theorist Raymond Williams, who defined culture as how ideas and meanings are expressed in ordinary behaviour, learning, and art. Taking these understandings of culture as my cue, for me, all tourism is cultural because it involves people and it is about practice, what people do, and about expressing ideas. I'm not dismissing the idea that cultural practices and expressions are turned into commodities to be consumed, but I do think that we need to ask questions about how valid some of the labels and hence segmentation in marketing terms of what people do as tourists can be. We need to understand where and who we are speaking about and reflect on our own understandings of what we think the purpose of tourism should be. So the image on this slide of the local pub in Magaluf perhaps gives the idea that it's not what we might think of in terms of local to Mallorca that informs people's ideas about what Mallorca and Palma Nova are like, and therefore what is commodified for consumption there. So to address the question of how places and people become resources for tourism is bound up with decisions made of governments, national and local levels, the role of what is called the tourism industry, and the dissemination of ideas about places and peoples through all sorts of formats: the tourist brochure, the television programme, the coffee table book, a film, TV programme, newspaper reports, and in more recent years, the burgeoning use of social media that allows people to share their experiences in real time to sometimes an audience of millions. In short, a discursive range of material informs our understandings of what it is, what our understandings of what elsewhere is like, and what we might find there. The narratives can then be put together and made into a product to sell, which is then marketed. It seems fairly obvious, but what I think we need to reflect on is any assumption that it is local culture being sold. Tour operating marketing for Palma Nova and Magaluf shows pictures of hotels, swimming pools, beaches, nightclubs. There might be a picture of Palma Cathedral. Of the many guidebooks I have perused, the resorts are usually dismissed as not worth visiting, and in fact one even recommends knocking Magaluf down. I've rarely, if ever, encountered news media reporting about Palma Nova, but I've seen plenty about Magaluf, and it's invariably based on what is seen as unacceptable behaviour by some of the tourists who go there. No more so than in 2014 and the infamous case of sexual activity organised in the resort. Before proceeding, I understand that the resorts are undergoing change. New owners of hotels and bars, for example, means names of facilities change, pricing changes, different tourists are attracted, local bylaws influence what tourists can and can't do. And this in turn will change the overall landscape of the resorts. The images I use are taken from across the years of my research, and it could be that a bar or cafe sign that I will show you is now no longer there. So what did I find? So a landscape characterised by signals of Britishness, a complex term, but I use here for shorthand. Bars and cafes named as if they are on a high street in the UK. Food to appeal to British tastes, roast dinners, Yorkshire pudding, English breakfasts, fish and chips, cups of tea, and with many of the ingredients imported from the UK. Bread, bacon, sausages, cod, milk, fish and chips. In the late 1990s, it was possible to spend pounds sterling and buy an imperial pint of beer. Whole hotels were given over to tourists who came from the UK, brought to the island invariably by a UK-based tour operator who would even fly in hotel entertainment from the UK for their tourists. In the hotels, the tour operator representatives would greet their tourists with a welcome meeting, advertised as an information-giving session, but which were really a way to sell more products, along with large doses of reminders that the tourists were not in the UK. Remember to change the time on your watch. Remember the sun is hotter here than at home. Don't use the local buses because of the pickpockets. Don't go to Inca Market without us because you won't be able to get back easily. Don't drink the water, and so on and so on. Here, the local culture was presented as dangerous and threatening, so it was best to stay within the arms of the tour operator to stay safe. So what about the tourists? Well, they were predominantly white, working class and British, and mainly from the north of the country. We see a mix of age of people, ages ranged from 8 weeks to over 90, travelling as couples, a family or friendship group, rarely anyone on their own. They pursued different kinds of activities, playing bingo in a hotel, clubbing, having lunch in a cafe, taking part in nighttime entertainment activities, sunbathing by beach or pool, going in the sea, taking part in organised activities, tours, visits to markets, boat trips. There was the first-time visitor and the repeat visitor. The repeat visitor in their 18th year, staying in the same hotel or apartment as in previous years, and often looking for exactly the same room as they'd had in all of the previous 17 years of their visit. What I don't think we have in these photos is anything that is necessarily recognisable as local culture that we might expect in relation to Mallorca. What is being commodified is an effervescent Britishness, a sense of a familiar home world, often thought to one that has been lost in the UK. And it's that sense of Britishness that is so effective that one tourist told me that she felt more at home in Mallorca than in the UK. And are the tourists in search of the local? I would suggest not. As another tourist told me, he wanted to go somewhere for his holidays that he knew he would be able to get an English breakfast. The tourists want to relax, lie in the sun, forget the bills, have fun, be able to indulge their bodily senses, feeling warm, eating, drinking too much, having sex, and some like to party. What results from what the tourists are hoping their holiday will be like is a commodification of various aspects of social and cultural life. Fun can be rented. Sexualised parts of the body are turned into items for consumption, and women especially are objectified as sexual beings. Along with this attention to sex and normative or stereotypical gendered relationships is a casual misogyny that also becomes commodified alongside other references to ideas of violence misrecognised as it is served up as humour. To conclude, places and people become resources because they are drawn attention to. But to truly understand what is consumed in any specific location, there's a need to understand touristic practices. By engaging with tourists and finding out what it is they are doing and why it is meaningful to them. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. And now we move on to the next presentation. Dr. Noel Salazar, please.
Good morning. I would like to start by thanking the organizers, the curators of this very exciting series, also this beautiful cultural center where we are for hosting us, and for thanking also my co-panelists, and I'm looking forward also to the debate with all of you here. I also want to apologize that I don't speak Catalan, so I will have to do in English, but people who want a translation have a translation. Barcelona is a city of many things. One of the things that Barcelona is known for is it's a city of rebels and activists. So I try to stay true to that, and what I will be doing is not exactly what the organizers expected, but bear with me. And if the slides work. My slideshow is very boring. I have hardly any pictures. I have a lot of words, and this is on purpose. I have a very simple message that I want to bring across, and in order to do that, I have to impress words upon you. So this is basically the idea. The images would merely distract you. So one of the concepts that I'm using a lot is the one of tourismification, and in English and the literature you see a lot of touristification, where the tourist is at core, and I don't like this at all, because oftentimes the tourist is blamed as the problem, and I see the problem as much wider. It's tourism as a whole, and of course tourists are part of tourism, but there are other actors too who may be problematic, and that's why tourismification. And so tourismification is always characterized by changes, and we humans don't like changes. We have problems coping with changes, and so when the change is caused by tourism, it's the same as with other things. But tourismification is problematic because there are changes happening at multiple scales, multiple levels, and involving multiple aspects. There are spatial changes, economic changes, cultural changes, social changes, and all these changes are happening all at once, sometimes at different speeds, but they are happening all at once, and so they have an impact, and they impact different people differently. And so this is why many people then start seeing tourism as a problem, whereas oftentimes when tourism starts to develop somewhere, it's welcomed as something that will change things for the better, but then it turns out that apparently there are issues with tourism. Another concept, too quick, Another concept that I want to use and that I will be delving into is the one of imaginaries. Imaginaries is a concept that is also used outside of tourism, but of course here we want to apply it to the field of tourism. And what you see mentioned up there is a very academic definition of what an imaginary is. What is very important to point out here is that imaginaries are things that are in our heads, and in this case about destinations. And what is very important is things that are in our heads are shared, so we actually share them with other people. So if you would ask people all around the room here what they think about New York, it would be very interesting that a lot of these ideas seem to be shared among the group here. And so this is what I'm interested in the sharedness, because of course imaginaries always interact with the person, the individual, because we all have different histories. And so these imaginaries that are shared always interact with our personal histories. And so there is always an interaction, but there is always a sharedness. And this is important to keep in mind, because it's the sharedness that gives these imaginaries a lot of strength. The fact that we recognize that what we think about certain places is also shared by other people thinking very similar things. And these imaginaries are circulating. And of course, 200 years ago, they were already circulating, but at a slower speed. Nowadays, we have a lot of modern technologies that allow these imaginaries to circulate much more rapidly, and so also that means that the impact can be much greater, because there's a lot more circulation happening. When we're talking about tourism imaginaries, there's very interesting things happening in tourism. A lot of these imaginaries are temporal in the sense that oftentimes when people travel, there is this idea also that you travel either back in time, and so a lot of places, historic places, are imagined as traveling back in time, but sometimes also it's traveling to the future when you travel to cities that are imagined as exponents of examples of how the future may look like. So there seems to be a game going on with the time. And I've been doing research in different destinations, and I will not be talking about those destinations because it will take me far too much time to explain what these destinations are all about and what their imaginaries are. But this is just a sample to show that the way that imaginaries are built and the way they get to us come in many different ways. And so these are examples of elements that help to create a dominant imaginary about a safari destination in Tanzania. And I show here only the visual stuff because, of course, there's other things that are non-visual, but I don't have time here to explain that. And this is another set of elements that helps to construct yet another destination. And this is, of course, very simplified because the elements that help to construct the imaginary are far more complex and involve far more elements, but it's just to give you a picture of what kind of elements help to form this shared ideas about places and the people living in those places. But what I thought I would be doing, and I'm totally not an expert on Barcelona, is of course try to apply these concepts to Barcelona and think about Barcelona not from the perspective of Barcelona, but from these global imaginaries. And so people from all around the world, how they look at Barcelona, and so what kind of elements they think about. And what I'm mentioning here are the most common elements. If you would interview people around the world, this would be elements that would be popping up. And what is very interesting in terms of Barcelona is that the first elements are very stereotypical tourism imaginaries of Barcelona. But what is very interesting is that Barcelona is one of the first tourism destinations in the world, together with places like Venice, where actually the problems related to tourism have also become part of the tourism imaginary. So many people who travel to Barcelona are very much aware of the fact that there is things that have been identified as over-tourism and that there is a problem here with tourism. So this issue has become part of the tourism imaginary itself, which is a very interesting element and makes Barcelona quite unique. Oops. I was going too quick. Yeah. So if we say that Barcelona is known and that many people know Barcelona, so what is very important also to point out is that in different parts of the world, what people tend to stress about Barcelona is different. And so all these different groups have different imaginaries. They may all travel to the same city, but they come with a different set of imaginaries and also a different set of expectations related to that imaginary. And so this is very important to realize. So in Europe, what is most common is Barcelona as a short-term destination. People come for long weekends, a couple of days, city trips. Barcelona as a party destination, so that's a very particular set. North America has a very different type of set, and this is related to some of the depictions of Barcelona, and I've mentioned here one of the very influential movies that helped to shape and create that imaginary. Latin America, yet of course because of the language and the historical connections, where Barcelona is seen as a city where also people may realize their dreams, and so this is maybe more long-term in terms of migration, not just only tourism. And this is a very important point, because when we are talking about imaginaries, and even if we are focusing on tourism, it's very hard to isolate tourism from all the other processes that are going on, both inside the city and among the people that come to the city. There's all kind of other processes. And so when we talk about tourism and we try to deal with the problems related to tourism, it's actually also important to think about all these other processes that are also influencing tourism and that are influencing the tourists coming here. So it's a major set of problems. And so other destinations or other places have other sets of imaginaries. And so through which type of channels do these imaginaries circulate globally? And this is not an exhaustive list. That's why in the last point you have the ... There's of course many more, but there are quite a lot. And so of course when we think about tourism, we would think in the first instance about official tourism organizations, because these would be the first that would create a certain image about the destination and circulate it. But of course there's many other sources too. There's the media, and the media of course does not necessarily only report about tourism. They may report about all kind of other things. So what people see about Barcelona is a whole set of issues. And then of course nowadays, and this is becoming stronger and stronger, is the digital mouth-of-mouth and social media representation. So people themselves who reinforce and distribute all kind of images, and these streams are very hard to research. It's very hard to actually get a grasp of what is exactly circulating, what is dominant, because we can impossibly circulate all these different streams, and it's also a very difficult stream to actually control. How can you control all this social media exchanges? Very difficult. And then there are other elements, cultural products and icons, so a lot of other things that also influence. So exhibitions that are organized that are related to the city, books that are written about the city, sports, and of course FC Barcelona. Even recently it was again in the world news because something happened with the team that was important, so it was covered all over the world. And then of course people may have direct experience with the city, or people living in the city. They may have also learned about the city, so a lot of different sources are actually circulating around the world, and there is no one that actually has a clear view of what exactly is circulating and where. So it makes it also very hard to come to policies about it. So what I said already before, imaginaries about a city like Barcelona, it's not only tourism. There are other elements that, again, depending on where you are and where you are situated and what kind of sources you have access to, one of these may be more or less important. I put here again the football first, because the football has a huge impact. It's global, and it's quite important. There's of course the issue, and this is maybe more at the European level, quite a bit covered, and Catalan identity related to politics, and so also here it goes up and down. So there are periods where this receives a lot of coverage, less, but also a city related to design, innovation, and also a lot of urban renewal and a lot of urban experiments. This is maybe also related to the next point. A city that is also known, like I said in the beginning, for its activism and its protest culture. It's not only, of course, protest against tourism. There's a lot of social and urban activism in the city. And also this is an imaginary that is circulating. And then this is maybe also related, and the vibrant youth and counterculture scene, which may also attract yet another segment of people. So lots of different types of imaginaries. And so, like I said, I'm not an expert in 3 minutes. Okay, so we are almost there. Like I said, I'm not an expert on the city of Barcelona, but it's very interesting when you look at the literature, and of course when you read the news, there are issues here with tourism in the city, and there are all kind of ideas to develop the city otherwise, and to prepare it for a future that is more sustainable and that can deal in a better way with tourism. And so I've mentioned here a couple of things that I have seen passing by in the literature. The managed and sustainable destination, and of course we can have a whole debate of what that actually means, sustainability. The curated cultural and creative hub, so stressing this more innovative aspects. The authentic neighborhood experience, which ties very much in with what you were saying at the beginning, the smaller scale and more personal kind of experiences. The work and play lifestyle hub, I think in the next talk we will be hear more about that too. But we have also the enduring icons, so the icons that are there and will contain to be here, and the contested city. Because there is contestation, and the question is, will this contestation go away in the future? And so different actors in tourism and beyond tourism have developed all kind of strategies. And again here, there's all kind of very nice words, but where of course we all have questions what these words all mean and how they will be implemented. And again, when we are talking about tourism strategies, we can impossibly talk only about tourism strategies, because tourism affects the whole social fabric of a city, and so it means that you need to involve a lot of actors that are not directly involved in tourism but are clearly affected by it. And so this is also important to take care of. And this is my last slide. Imaginaries are here to stay, and one of the problems with imaginaries is that once an imaginary has become dominant, and so once a destination has dominant imaginaries about it, it's very hard to change those imaginaries, which also means that if you have policies and you want to change the way you do tourism, it's very hard to change those imaginaries, once again, because it's very hard to control the way in which these imaginaries are circulating. And so the imaginaries are one of the most tricky elements in actually trying to deal with tourism in a way that benefits not only the city but also benefits the people living in the city. And having said that, I see that the organizer of this session is looking at me with impatience that I should stop, so I will do this.
Thank you very much. And now we go to the last presenter, Dr. Fabiola Mancinelli.
Hola. Well, gracias Konstantina por las preguntas, and to Hazel and Noel for your intervention. And gracias també a la meva companya i amiga Saida Palou, a qui deu aquesta invitació, i també a tot l'equip del CCCB per convidar-me a creuar al carrer, perquè estic tot just al costat. So I would like to start my brief intervention by calling attention to the elephant in the room, that is authenticity. To spark further debate, here are two key points I'd like to raise about authenticity. As tourism anthropologists, we are often confronted with the idea that tourism undermines authentic culture because it commodifies it. It sells it by the pound, as the anthropologist David Greenwood famously said when studying the Alarde Festival in Fuenterrabía in the 1980s. Greenwood observed how the Alarde celebration adapted to tourism. The dates were changed, locals were pushed aside, and front row seats were sold to visitors. All of these adjustments were made to turn the ritual into a tourism product. However, there is a fundamental problem with the idea that tourism kills authentic culture. Maybe we're asking the wrong question, because the notion of authentic culture could be itself a myth. So here we go. The term authentic culture is in many ways an oxymoron, a combination of contradictory terms. This can be counterintuitive, as we are so trained to think about authenticity as an objective quality of cultural production. But if culture, as Edward Said says, is hybrid, heterogeneous, and constantly evolving, speaking of an authentic culture would imply denying this fundamental fact. To call a culture authentic implies that exists a pure version untouched by outside forces. But no culture is untouched. All cultures adapt, borrow, and change. Consequently, saying that a cultural representation is authentic means idealizing or romanticizing a practice or a moment in time, establishing that that version is better, more genuine, more intimate, or more real. In tourism, authenticity is often equated to non-commodified practices, what people do for themselves rather than for the tourist gaze. But authenticity is not a inherent quality, it is a social construction, an idea that has been created and accepted by people at a certain point in society. Take the Castells, or Catalan human towers. Since 2010, an intangible UNESCO heritage of humanity. They are often presented used to present Catalan culture to people who are unfamiliar with it and consider one of the most authentic forms of local culture. Catalan human towers originated in 1801, a little over 200 years ago, and at the beginning were a male-only practice. Women joined in 1970, and the practice now emphasizes values like diversity, integration, and teamwork. It even serves as a way to socialize migrants into Catalan culture. Still, despite all these transformations and quite recent popularity, human towers are considered an authentic form of cultural expression. So, if castles, transformed over time, opened up to women, and reimagined to include migrants are still authentic, then perhaps we should ask, what does authenticity actually means and who gets to decide? My second point is that labeling something as authentic inevitably defines something else as inauthentic. These judgments are not neutral. They reflect power relations and can be politically or ideologically loaded. Who decides what counts as authentic? And those who hold the authority to define culture, while other voices are excluded from it. Consider Rosé Segimon, who founded Casa Milà. Konstantina was talking about it before, but is often left out in favor of celebrating her husband and the male elite. Along the same line, we can look at the history of our city, from the Gothic district to the many beautiful monumental houses that tourists come to see, Casa Milà, Casa Batlló, Parc Güell, as a celebration of the visionary entrepreneurial spirit of a handful of bourgeois capitalists. Or decide, for instance, to speak of the uncomfortable truth linking many of their fortunes to colonialism, to slavery, and to a specific vision of ethnocentrism that often remains unquestioned. A powerful example is the statue of Antonio López y López, an aristocrat and a slave trader whose monument stood in Barcelona until 2018. Its removal marked a shift in how history is remembered or told. Alternatively, we might choose to tell the stories of the working class whose labor made this city great. Practices of labor exploitations were widely accepted as normal in the 19th century. So which version is more authentic? The grand architectural legacy of Catalan modernism or the uncomfortable histories of exploitation that helped fund it? The answer is, of course, both. Whether both are being told, especially within tourist narratives, is another question entirely. So, as Konstantina asked, should we include ugly details in the narrative? Yes, and I believe tourist mediators are already doing so, although perhaps not as boldly as they could. Some cultural narratives are shifting, and tourist narratives are beginning to shift as well. Continuing with the example, there is currently an exhibition at the Maritime Museum about Catalan participation in the slave trade, as well as there is an association of anthropologists and historians offering a tour on the urban legacy of slave traders in the architectural heritage of our city. Ultimately, it is all about how tourism legitimizes, to quote an anthropologist, Camila del Marmol, certain uses of the past, social and cultural practices that reflect how each society represents and makes sense of its own history. This idea brings us back to the question at the heart of this panel, the commodification of culture. How does something local, singular, and symbolic for a community become a resource to be consumed by global tourists? Tourism, as an economic activity, has often been blamed for transforming local culture and heritage into marketable goods. Drawing on what I've said so far, I believe that the issue at stake is not whether culture remains authentic or not. Rather, it is about understanding how commodification works, what it does, its mechanism of production, and the artifice that shape commodified culture. One important point to highlight is that the commodification of culture is not necessarily the result of marketing strategies or top-down mechanism. It can also emerge from the bottom up, especially in the age of social media and influencers. Individuals may develop an interest in a cultural practice, be it a food, a wine, a ritual, a particular building, or even a picturesque corner, and adopt it as a tourism marker, converting it into a meaningful place for them. And you see lines in the city and you ask, what are they here waiting for? I'm thinking of these murals of Maradona in Naples, which has become a kind of sacred site, echoing McCannell's concept, especially after the football player's death. It is now one of the most visited sites in Italy. Maradona was Argentinian, not Neapolitan, and he only spent 7 years in the city. Yet, he has become its elective patron saint, representing values of self-made success and redemption. So in my view, when discussing the commodification of culture through tourism, it's crucial to highlight a different and perhaps more complex dynamic than the supposed loss of authenticity. The adaptation and production of culture specifically to align with tourist expectation, which is not a linear process. Or, as it's often phrased in marketing discourse, how do we meet the demand of the market? Once again, this invites us to reflect on the power relations at play. Who shapes the narrative, who benefits, and who is being asked to adapt? We can refer to this process as becoming other. It occurs in all kinds of tourism, from urban cultural tourism to ethnic tourism in faraway places. Becoming other refers to the pressure to adapt to the idealized identities that tourists expect, performing for the tourist gaze while also adapting to their expectations in order to make them feel at home when abroad. Because tourism, as we have seen from Hazel's account, is also hospitality as well as an economic activity. Adapting involves a process of essentialization, reducing the complexity of identity to simple, reproducible features. Just a couple of examples of this dynamic of becoming other. The first example comes from my fieldwork among the Zafimaniri of Madagascar. The Zafimaniri live in remote villages that could only be reached on foot and received about 2,000 tourists per year, mainly hikers. The Zafimaniri once asked my opinion about building a road to access the village. The road would have served many purposes. For instance, facilitating the access to the medical center, making it easier for school teachers to reach the village, and allowing groceries and other supplies to be transported more easily. However, Zafimaniri were concerned that the road might be detrimental for tourism, as it could undermine their primitive and authentic image, and tourists might stop coming. A second example, which is from a much closer in time and space, is this local restaurant in the heart of Plaza Real, very close to La Rambla, trying to resist becoming other in an attempt to really educate tourists about local customs and ways of living. On the graffiti warning that when Magdalenas will be called muffins, gentrification will be closed. Two examples of how performing otherness can be met or confronted depending on the relative power relations and the people involved. So to close, let me return to the heart of the matter, and not with an answer, of course, but with a reminder that culture is never untouched. It is always in motion, shaped by encounters, by gazes, by desires, our own and others. Tourism doesn't simply reflect culture, it produces it. And in doing so, it forces us to confront difficult questions. Who defines what is worth showing? And what gets lost or silenced when culture is packaged, sold, and consumed? As we have seen, commodification can be top-down or bottom-up, resisted or embraced, a tool for domination of a strategy of survival. But what matters most is not whether commodification happens. It always does. But how it happens, who benefits, and whose voices are heard in the process. The real work for us, as scholars, practitioners, and cultural mediators, is to stay attentive to the way authenticity is claimed, constructed, and contested, not to mourn the loss of an imagined purity, but to keep asking what story is being told and who is being asked to become other so that someone else can feel at home. So I will close to this intervention with my favorite object to think is something I share with Saida Palou, souvenirs, my favorite object to think with when we come to ask questions about tourism. Gracias.
Thank you very much, all three of you, for the presentations. Thank you very much, Fabiola, for your presentation also. So I don't know if there are any questions. If you would like, we can start the round of questions. Yes, please. Is there a microphone? Yes, great.
Bon dia, gràcies per la intervenció de tots plegats. Jo sóc terriblement crítica, vull dir que allà va. Primer de tot, aquí hi ha un elefant, encara més gros que ha anomenat vostè, que es diu fons d'inversió, financiarització, en definitiva, de l'economia. I això existeix des de fa, no sé, un centenar d'anys, potser una mica abans. I cada vegada, diguéssim, sobretot amb l'arribada de les noves tecnologies, doncs això s'ha multiplicat exponencialment. Això afecta a la vida de la gent en general i a la turistificació en particular, o les migracions. Jo en dic migracions. No parlo de turistificació perquè en dic migracions, que poden ser de diferents tipus. Visc a Ciutat Vella, a la zona del barri de Sant Pere Santa Caterina, no del Born, sisplau, senyors de l'Ajuntament, que el mercat de Santa Caterina, que es va encarregar en el període d'en Pasqual Maragall, tot i que, en fi, tenia certes coses que estaven bé, però moltes que estaven malament, sobretot en aquell barri, perquè teníem un mercat que era dels més importants de Barcelona, amb 860 parades, i es va veure reduït a 160, crec que n'hi havia quan el van reobrir, i ara com que van tancant, perquè com que a la vegada s'han anat obrint supermercats a dojo, doncs, en fi, ja no té, ha perdut, i cada vegada es tanquen més parades. Ara ja no sé quantes n'hi ha, 4 i el gat, i a més no és barat, que abans hi trobaves de lo més barat i lo més car. Dels pagesos que venien, hi havia moltes parades de pagesos, i ara no n'hi ha cap perquè en el lloc on hi havia els pagesos s'hi va muntar un supermercat. Bé, això per situar-nos, no? En aquest barri hem viscut diferents onades de tipus d'immigracions. En els anys 70-80 hi havia la migració de tipus econòmic i amb diversos tipus de cultures, que anaven variant, que no sé el per què anaven variant al llarg del temps. Però vaja, n'hi havia de magrebina, n'hi havia de Costa Rica, em sembla que eren, o no, de Costa Rica no. Bueno, de país centreamericà, etc. I per aquí al carrer Ferlandina bastants filipins. Bé, com deia, aquesta migració era una migració que posava problemes, efectivament, però que tenia una actitud que se sentia com inferior i com si se sentís d'autora del lloc on estaven. En canvi, ara tenim des de fa... davant de casa hi ha un immoble antic que l'han partit allò amb habitacions i hi ha expats, no? I, bueno, aquests és la nova migració, que en dic jo, no? I que en tenim moltíssims en el barri, moltíssims. Doncs aquests van amb una actitud de superioritat que, vull dir, vaja, que t'empenyen així, que t'has de plantar, no? I no només això, sinó que tenen actituds molt incíviques, com per exemple tirar les bosses de la brossa en comptes del contenidor, que és a 5 minuts o 3 d'allà on vivim, a la paperera, que és just al sortir al carrer, no? I els ho dius i et miren, com si no sabessin de què els parlessis. I els fas el gest que els immigrants d'abans entenien perfectament, aquests no l'entenen i deixen la bossa allà. Bueno, això és per mi el problema més greu, és el que he plantejat abans, perquè la qüestió de la financiarització de l'economia, l'economia productiva és una nou i l'economia financera especulativa, en definitiva, és una síndria de les més grosses. I això és importantíssim per abordar la situació d'avui i la que tenim per endavant.
Moltes gràcies per el comentari i la pregunta. Bueno, bàsicament l'explicació de la situació. No sé if anybody would like to answer something to that or make a comment. Yes.
Jo volia agrair pel comentari i l'explicació i també dir que, tot i que la meva intervenció no anava precisament a encarar aquest elefant, sí que crec que et dones pistes per aplicar algunes de les preguntes que he fet al que està passant a Barcelona, que evidentment s'ha citat i ho coneixem tot. Quan la ciutat es converteix en mercancia, hi ha justament molts actors que intervenen i sobretot econòmics, no? I el turisme és un gran pastís i amb molts interessos. Nosaltres com a antropòlegs no mirem només a l'aspecte econòmic, sinó també a la pràctica social. Però quines són les veus silenciades en aquest procés que vostè descriu? Qui es beneficia, no? Els fons voltors, la financiarització de l'economia, etc. Jo crec que parlar de les persones a peu de carrer, el turista, l'enemic o l'expat, el nòmada digital, oculta les responsabilitats polítiques que hi ha al darrere d'alguns mecanismes de promoció de la ciutat. I doncs, evidentment, hem de ser, jo crec, molt cautelosos a l'hora d'abordar certes qüestions. I no m'extenderé més perquè crec que també és un tema complex per resoldre. Però moltes gràcies.
Gràcies. Sí, n'hi ha dues preguntes.
Aquest home?
Sí.
Hola. No seré tan llarga com aquesta persona, però bueno, jo crec que afecta molt d'un punt de vista antropològic, que dieu, sociològic, psicològic, a les persones que vivim aquí, a Barcelona. La massificació turística, sigui dels expats, sigui de la immigració que ve aquí pel que sigui treballar per pobresa i tal, afecta d'un punt de vista, ho diré molt pla perquè s'entengui, animalístic, sí? I faré un exemple. En una colònia de formigues, sí? Quan venen d'una altra espècie, d'un altre clan de formigues, i van parelles, no? O massificació, què passa? Es barallen? No s'ha arribat a aquest punt perquè som gent civilitzada, evidentment. No som ni formigues ni animals. Però esdevé un punt que a Barcelona sigui turísticament el model teològic, perquè en teoria tot està molt bé, però a la pràctica trepitja de peus a terra. Escolta al carrer què diu la gent. L'alcalde es fa el borni. Alcalde, bueno, el que és l'Ajuntament.
però és un problema. És un problema. I si no es fa, no es varia de model, no es fa alguna cosa, la cosa pot esdevenir greu, no ho sé, no? Però que la gent es fastigueja molt.
Gràcies pel comentari. Alguna pregunta o simplement...
Sí, la pregunta, com ho veieu els teòrics, això? A peu de carrer, Perquè jo aquesta dona jo l'entenc molt bé. Ho ha exposat perfectament, al seu barri. Jo soc del Guinardó.
Vale.
Sí, un momentet. I de seguida acabo, per favor, sí. Xica. Vale. Ronda Guinardó. I és incessant la gent que va cap al Parc Güell. Que és el Triángulo de les Bermudes, no? Sagrada Família, sí. Sant Pau i Parc Güell. Incessant. Massificació turística. Com ho veieu els teòrics? Gràcies.
Gràcies. A veure, dins de la perspectiva més bé d'una persona també que viu en el gòtic, jo puc dir que les experiències i les comparacions canvien molt. És cert que viure en una ciutat que té un estil de vida que és molt agradable, i jo puc entendre que n'hi ha molts diferents des de fa anys fins ara, però també la ciutat evoluciona com totes les ciutats i n'hi ha canvis que pot ser que n'hi ha gent que no pot acceptar, que no vol viure sense, però la gent que és més jove, i no me'n refereixo a migrants que viuen aquí, sinó gent que és més jove, ha nascut aquí, ha viscut aquí, no fa aquest tipus de comparació possiblement tan radical. O no. Bueno, però de totes formes són realitats que cada persona viu d'una forma molt diferent, i en una ciutat n'hi ha molts perfils de molta gent molt diferent, i és molt difícil, òbviament, crear una forma de convivència, però acusar el turisme, jo crec que és molt important entendre que les persones van en un context on estan convidats. N'hi ha un diferent tipus de massificació de turistes en Japó. N'hi ha un diferent tipus de ser ciutadà en contextos diferents i en països diferents, per reglaments i per formes de ser que són diferents. Allà també van molts, en Japó també tenen overtourisme i turistificació, però els residents no ho viuen d'aquesta forma. Per tant, podem pensar en moltes formes d'administració i de gestió, però no pensar que la solució és que aquí tenim molts turistes. La meva vida en el barri ha canviat. La meva vida, quan jo vivia en Sant Feliu durant l'estiu, era molt més diferent que quan estava en febrer, perquè venia molta gent de Barcelona a segona residència. O sigui, aquesta massificació sí, però la idea no és acusar el que ve. El problema és molt més fora, és més enllà que el turista. El turisme podia ser, i ni siquiera el problema, la situació que hauríem d'adreçar. Però quan un atractiu, una ciutat, un espai, hem invertit molt perquè sigui bonic, perquè sigui autèntic, perquè sigui beautiful, com estem dient, és obvi que les persones volen veure i conèixer aquesta història, aquest context. No podem dir que no pots venir aquí, no pots viure aquí, no pots fer aquí. Les condicions de la vida... De totes formes. Algun comentari més? Alguna pregunta? Sí? Sí, pot ser.
Sí. Hola. Sí, thank you very much for the intervention, and linking with the last one, I would like to ask the panelists, to what extent does tourism also help to maintain our culture? And for example, I'm putting the example, the Sagrada Familia. We are almost all of the citizens of Barcelona are proud of the Sagrada Familia, but we could not have this without tourism, or we could not have the MACBA, or the MENAC, or the Picasso Museum. No? So, to what extent this other view of tourism is also helping to shape this reality?
Thank you. Yes.
Yeah. Okay. I appreciate the problems that Barcelona has in terms of overcrowding. But one thing I would caution against is just assuming that the problem is down to numbers. People in Goa have lost their livelihoods, have lost their homes a long time ago as a result of tourism, in which there were not the numbers that we see today. So that's one comment. Another observation is how can tourism help to preserve local culture? there is evidence from around the world, and I can't speak about Barcelona because I have never researched here, but there is evidence from around the world that tourism has helped to preserve local culture or revive local culture because tourists have shown an interest in it. And that's my comments on that.
Yes, I just want to comment actually on a couple of things because we haven't had a chance yet to speak. I think it's very important to distinguish, although the categories are always blurry, but I think it is important to distinguish migration from tourism. These are different processes. The imagined problem with migration is that the problem with migrants is that they are here to stay, and that's perceived as a problem. The problem with tourism is that tourism is fleeting, it's coming and going, and that's the problem. Tourists don't care about what they cause because they will be gone in a couple of days. And so the problems are different. And of course, a city like Barcelona has to confront both of these and many other problems at the same time. About tourism and culture, like we have heard, and I think we all have a pretty similar message, culture is not a static thing, and so tourism is part of culture. Now, how you manage this, the management, whatever you manage, because you need to manage tourism, whatever you do has implications, and sometimes these implications have unintended consequences. But there are many cases around the world, and it's very dangerous to compare because every reality and every context is different. But there are many cases around the world that showcase the consequences of certain management models. And I can tell from my experience in Tanzania, it's a very different type of tourism like we have here. It's mostly nature tourism, where we are dealing with very fragile nature. And so we don't need big numbers to totally destroy this very fragile natural habitat. And so in Tanzania, what they have decided as a policy for a very long time is to actually try to make tourism very expensive in the hope that by making it very expensive, less people will be able to afford, and so the numbers will go down. So that's a strategy. Now, what actually happened in practice is that when you make something very expensive, you also add to this idea, if it's so expensive, it must be really unique. So if we want to see this, we will just do an effort and just gather money, and then we will visit it because it must be very unique. So it doesn't really affect the numbers because people keep on coming. So it's an unintended consequence because it doesn't have the effect. There's a lot of research on the influence of tourism and on culture on the island of Bali, where I've also done research. And already from very early on, it became clear that tourism has been ongoing for actually a long time in Bali. It's over 100 years old. But that the Balinese have actually been very smart in actually managing tourism and in actually presenting to tourism elements of their culture or create tourism products that clearly have cultural elements, but are not necessarily authentic. And this is a very difficult term. A lot of the Balinese dances that are performed for tourists were actually created in the 1930s by Westerners who actually visited Bali and who saw, wow, this is such a rich culture and have this kind of dances. But it didn't please them from a Western perspective, because in the West we are used to dances having a choreography. And so if you go there with the dance expert in Bali, the dance experts will immediately point out, wow, this is a very interesting dance, but the choreography is definitely Western. And so this is basically what it is. So it is a very interesting dance, and many people go there, many tourists go there, take pictures and whatever. And so they get away with, we are here in Bali, and this is authentic. It has been there for quite a long time. It's even protected. Because authenticity is a complicated concept. So what is authentic? It's if the perceiver, in this case the tourist, is convinced it's authentic, then it's authentic. So you can have, as an academic, a different opinion about that, but that's what it is. And so, but the Balinese still have their own rituals, but to these rituals, tourists are generally not invited, and most of the tourists will not even know when they take place. So there are many different ways to manage, and it's not to say that Barcelona should do things in one way or the other. What is important is that you think about it. What is impossible is to say, stop tourism. The tourist will stop coming. And so the question is, how do you manage it? That's the question. And so how do you manage it also in the context of respecting culture, but also keeping in mind that culture is always changing. So if culture is not changing by tourism, it's also changing by other processes, because also in places where there is no tourism, culture is also changing. And so the research is very clear. If a culture is not allowed to change, then it dies.
Thank you very much. Yes, we have one question here.
Gràcies. Gràcies per la fantàstica ponència de tots quatre i també la moderació. Moltes idees interessants, intento ser molt breu. Dir també que l'última taula de demà és la que està dedicada a parlar dels impactes sobre la cultura local, sobre les cultures locals, sobre la ciutat. Per tant, hi ha preguntes que han sortit que demà tindrem temps de treballar-les més. Crec que seria interessant aprofitar molt tota aquesta provocació teòrica que la taula ens ha proposat i de manera molt breu situar alguns aspectes que em semblen molt interessants de les quatre ponències, incloent-hi la moderació, que m'ha semblat molt interessant, també per connectar-les amb el primer dels seminaris que vam tenir fa uns mesos, on hi havia una conclusió que ara em referiré al final. Crec molt pertinent l'observació que ara es feia sobre l'autenticitat com un concepte dinàmic. De fet, s'ha dit abans que la cultura no és un concepte estàtic. I m'ha agradat molt com Fabiola explicava que més que discutir autenticitat sí o no, és molt més interessant parlar de commodificació sí o no. La commodificació és un concepte molt descriptiu i útil perquè vol dir literalment que quelcom que no era una commodity, ve de l'anglès commodity, que vol dir objecte de consum, una cosa que no era un objecte de consum, per tant podia tenir un valor però no tenia un preu, acaba sent commodificada, s'acaba convertint en una commodity, acaba sent un objecte de consum i per tant acaba tenint un preu. Llavors entra en un circuit material i cultural molt diferent. La manera en la qual les cultures poden ser commodificades, jo crec que aquesta és la pregunta central i no tant interrogar-nos sobre l'autenticitat. En l'arquitectura això s'ha discutit molt, que és autèntic, que no. És un carreró sense sortida, acaba sentint-te com un hàmster donant voltes. Per tant, em sembla molt pertinent aquest plantejament de les escales i la dimensió de la commodificació. Això té molt a veure amb el procés de selecció del que és explicat que Konstantina Zerva explicava al començament, amb l'exemple fantàstic de Girona i de l'edifici de la universitat. Hi ha històries que són hipervisibles i històries que són invisibles, i això és decidit. I per tant això forma part d'una, diríem, estratègia comunicativa i té a veure amb una vessant material, etc. Això és important perquè acaba lligant amb el que Hazel plantejava de la segmentació. Ella ens parlava de que, al igual que qualsevol altra dimensió econòmica de la vida que tenim, treballem per segments i els productes els consumim segments de consumidors diferents. I per tant, el turisme explica molt bé aquesta segmentació de tipus de turisme, que també és una segmentació de tipus de territori. I l'exemple que la Hazel explicava quan parlava de Magaluf és molt i molt clar, no? I per últim, per arribar a la pregunta, sí, per últim, Noel Salazar ens parlava, per cert, trobo molt encertada la M en lloc de la T, quan parlen de turismificació i no turistificació, perquè, com s'ha dit abans, passem de castigar a l'últim grau de la cadena i a mirar més el procés. Salazar ens parlava de tot aquest procés de creació, de reproducció i de consum d'imaginaris. Són tres fases molt interessants d'aquest procés. I tot això també és molt dinàmic. Llavors, una de les coses que en el seminari anterior plantejàvem és que quan parlem de turisme ens adonem que el turisme avui dia s'ha accelerat molt. Si comparem amb els anys 50, els anys 60 del segle XX, s'ha accelerat molt en els territoris, en l'espai, i s'ha accelerat molt en el temps. I per tant, aquesta acceleració ens faria preguntar-nos, i és una pregunta que llenço a la taula, fins a quin punt totes aquestes qüestions, els debats, els imaginaris, els fets reals que s'amaguen o que no, els que tenen hipervisibilitat, fins a quin punt els processos de commodificació, fins a quin punt la creació d'imaginaris i l'establiment de segments de consum turístic, fins a quin punt aquesta acceleració no l'ha canviat de manera definitiva. Perquè si la resposta és sí, vol dir que gran part de la teoria sobre el turisme que tenim no ens serveix. I per tant trobo molt encertat a tenir-vos aquí amb nosaltres perquè ens ajudeu, perquè jo crec que és una pregunta crucial. Si el turisme s'ha accelerat i ja és una altra cosa, fins a quin punt aquests conceptes que tenim ens serveixen, si més no ens serveixen tal com els havíem pensat. Moltes gràcies.
Gràcies per la pregunta. No sé si algú vol contestar, comentar alguna cosa. Sí?
I think one of the issues around the increased segmentation, I mean, tourism must be one of the most described, most adjectival activities there is. So dark tourism is one form. There's now bakery tourism is one of the ones I've found about recently. Glacier tourism, mass tourism, cultural tourism. And I think what that does, I mean, it's an expression of the market, because the market has to keep regenerating itself in order to attract the customers. So that's what marketing does. But what I think then you have a problem of offsetting one kind of tourism as perhaps better than another kind, rather than addressing what the issues might be for any kind of tourism. I mean, basically, any form of travel is going to involve some kind of, at the moment, fossil fuel, which is bad for the environment. People have, the commodification aspect is donkey's years old. I mean, really, really old. And people have been paying to travel for hundreds of years. And ideas about other cultures have come from the so-called age of discovery, Christopher Columbus, when stories of the so-called New World were sent to Europe and they were exaggerated. So this question of authenticity is often about the authenticity of the other, because we need to look at our social world to understand what, in my view, what is missing. The people need to go anywhere at all, which is a naive approach and too big, but and maybe that's also part of the issue. But I think continually segmenting the market is down to business practices. And if you want to address many of these issues, I think trying to look at a whole, learning from older cases. So as I pointed out with the question of Goa, some of these ideas are not new, but they have perhaps not been felt so keenly in Europe until more recently. And not using phrases like over-tourism, because that was invented, as far as I'm aware, by journalists, and that kind of ignores all of the work that has gone prior to that, which maybe we could learn from now. And I probably have gone off, but...
Thank you very much. Fabiola.
Yes, and I just wanted to add that saying that tourism produces culture does not mean that we may or may not be worried about the kind of culture that results from the tourism encounter. Because as we will hear this afternoon with Marco Deramo, we live in a touristified world. So is it still possible to isolate tourism as a separate part of what it means living in certain places, not everyone, because it remains a kind of hegemonic culture produced from the West, but not exclusively, as we have seen that different people travel in different ways. So to what extent can we separate tourism and culture? And also, what kind of culture does tourism produce? Do we need
I'm provoking. Do we need the Sagrada Familia as much as the Sagrada Familia needs us? I mean, these kinds of thought-provoking questions are interesting to place, but in the end, it comes again to managing and involving voices and defend the right of places to be lived and not only as objects to be consumed. This ultimately is the worry, but of course it doesn't start this table because we started around a different question.
Thank you very much. I would also like to mention something. Oh, sorry. Yes.
No, you can go, ladies first.
No. Okay, thank you. Just to mention something when we speak about authenticity, and I think that one of the different interpretations we give to authenticity is not about whether it is original, unique, it came from the past, but there are many academic and theoretical evaluations of it as an experience. And having an authentically good time gives another vision of what authenticity can be. And especially today with new technologies, younger generations live life in a different way. And when they visit places, they visit them in a different place. The segments we have made until now are evolving themselves as we are evolving. And it's not just that the tourist gaze is a different gaze. The host is a different host. For example, I cannot imagine, I have a daughter, we live here in the city center. I do not know what will be Barcelona for her. It will definitely not be the Barcelona that I met when I came here, or the people that are from here, or their lives. It will be completely different cities, and they will all defend them in different ways. So having an authentically good time and being authentic is one way of living a place, experiencing a place, using the word without doing harm to the definition, and speaking about how things were at some point of time, because also the part that we praise from the past is a part of its evolution. It was never there from the beginning. So there are many ways to think about and speak about authenticity, and I think this narrative that we need to explain in its evolution, and also the bad moments, the ugly moments, must be somehow entering that way of understanding how we are today. So one question that I wanted to do, because it really came on different issues before, and I would like to make it to Noel, that has to do with Tanzania, because it is a territory that I have been visiting some time now. And there is a very specific territory that is Kigoma, and it is a very small village, very rural village. It is a place that one would see it and say, this is pure Africa, authentic Africa, because it's not touristified. And they have, of course, many problems. It's very, very beautiful. It's not easy to get there, but it has the magic, and it follows many of the imaginaries we can see. But on a touristic level, they want to evolve. And they are asking for us, the wise people that come from places where tourism has been established, what to do, what are the narratives we should follow, and how we should say it. And what they're looking for are the narratives we're saying, now stop, don't do that, do not commercialize that, don't put that price, do not beautify it. This is how it is. People will value it the way it is. You do not need to change it for my eyes. But it really costs them to believe me. So it really is a difficult effort, and they are easier and faster for them to follow a recipe they have seen working in other places, in other territories, where things were commodified and more tourists came, therefore more money came. It all goes down to money also. It was harder for me, and it is harder for me to convince them to stay as they are, to communicate it in a way as it is, because they do not see the touristic value in what they have. Even though when we say, I want to meet the culture of rural village in Tanzania, this is it. It is as it is. If you want to understand Barcelona, also go to Hospitalet. I don't know, maybe you should see other territories. But it really costs to understand how that actually can work for them. So I wanted to ask you, when you went there, if you faced these kind of dilemmas when people were creating the narratives of how to explain the territory, the local culture to the tourists.
Thank you, and I will try to answer by also giving still my comments on the previous set of issues, because they tie in, I think, quite nicely. About commodification, of course, in tourism things are being commodified like they are commodified everywhere, all around us. The latest thing I've heard that they are now commodifying air. I mean, they were already commodified water, now it's air, so now you can buy air. So I don't know what they will come up with next. But so in tourism, of course, it's all about commodification, but it's also about hiding basically the economic basis of the transaction. And that's why we have experience, and this is a concept that you also brought up. Experience, of course, is a way to kind of hide the commodification. And this is a concept that was actually developed in a very smart way by Starbucks. Starbucks in the 1990s, they have a coffee product. There's not much you can do to the the technical process of coffee making or whatever. It has been developed for a very long time. But Starbucks came up with this idea. So how can we charge more? Well, instead of selling coffee, we sell the experience of drinking coffee. And so it's the experience. And it's the same thing in tourism. Also, all this stress on experience is, of course, an idea to kind of hide also the economic experience and to make it all rather more emotional. But to come to your question of Tanzania, so if there is one thing that has failed over and over and over again, and policymakers over the world keep on making the same mistakes, it's the consultancy model. It's this idea that you develop something that works in one place, and then you sell it, and then you start implementing it all over the world. This simply doesn't work, and politicians and policymakers keep on doing the same thing. They keep on paying lots of money to very expensive consultancy firms that have a model that was implemented, that was developed somewhere, and then is then implemented all over the world. This does not work. It does not work here. It also doesn't work in Tanzania. But having said that, if you are in a country where you have not a lot of human resources, then of course it's very tricky. And then you have to, then of course what people do is rely on outsider expertise. And the same thing happens in Tanzania. And so there are many stakeholders that have come in, NGOs and tourism professionals, tourism academics, all with their ideas on how to develop tourism. And of course, tourism in a poor country like Tanzania, if people are thinking of developing tourism, it's thinking about also economic benefit. That is what is behind it. And then the question that requires a serious discussion with people is, okay, economic development at what cost? And this is already where it becomes complicated, because if you are having these discussions, like you would have these discussions here in Barcelona, who is sitting around the table? With whom are you having these discussions? Okay, you can have it maybe with some people from the city council, maybe with some tourism stakeholders, and then oftentimes also you have representatives of the local community or communities, but all these people sitting around the table, who are they actually, and how are they representing people? The representative model, and this is also a model that we use all over the place, but it actually doesn't work. If it's a truly representative model, it would mean that the people around the table are there, and so they are given a set of questions, and they all go back to the groups that they represent, and then they consult, and then they feed back. But this is not how it happens. People who are sitting there at the table, they are there, and they are speaking, supposedly representing the local community, but basically they are speaking and giving their own idea. And this is why we need to question all these models that we keep on using, but that actually are not efficient and actually don't work. But it's of course easy because we are doing that. And so to answer your question very briefly, in order to develop things in Tanzania, it takes time, and it takes a lot of time. So this is also what I did, this is what other people did. And the case that I have discussed often is a Dutch NGO that spent 20 years in Tanzania and helped develop villages with tourism programs in villages. And the model was very successful, and at a certain moment everything was going well. And then the Dutch NGO said, wow, perfect, it's all working well, and now we retreat. And so 1 year after they retreated, the whole system had collapsed. So it's a little warning about what we also consider as a success.
Thank you very, very much. Yes, there was a question here. If you want, we can have 2 questions together, so we can go faster. Yes.
A veure, sí, vale.
Sí.
Bueno, volia comentar que hem sentit aquí a les veïnes de Ciutat Vella i del Guinardó, amb les quals han patit molt amb tota la problemàtica que heu comentat i també tota la resta que s'ha parlat. Però bueno, jo treballo al turisme des de fa més de 20 anys també i tinc un dubte, que és que al final tots patim problemes en aquesta ciutat d'una forma o d'una altra, però crec que hi ha un punt que és que no veiem quin és el benefici que obtenim com a gent local que vivim aquí, no? O sigui, al final hi ha un benefici econòmic que és molt clar per tota la ciutat, però què es fa amb aquests diners que ens reporti a nosaltres, no? I no sé si vosaltres, que sou antropòlegs i esteu més ficats en temes més globals, teniu exemples de com aquests països donen visibilitat als beneficis, no? Perquè, òbviament, hi ha problemes molt greus, no? Hem de marxar de la ciutat, etc. Però potser si veiéssim una mica més què ens aporta el turisme fet des d'una manera sostenible, podríem fer com una mica un balanç, no? I és una mica aquest dubte de què en podem treure de positiu de tot el turisme, perquè jo tinc clar que ens aporta moltes coses, però bueno, cost-benefici potser s'ha de balancejar, no? I és aquest dubte.
Perfecte, gràcies. I també si podem l'altra pregunta al final i ja contestem les dues.
Morning. I was wondering, why don't we look at the guest culture? So, I mean, why when you have a reaction to tourism, you don't look to the different reactions in different cities? I mean, you speak over tourism, but Barcelona has 12.5.6 million tourists a year. Paris has 48 million a year. London has more than that, has 55 million a year. But you don't have the same hostility in London and in Paris. So Rome has approximately the same tourists as Barcelona. You don't have the same hostility. So there are some cities where you have hostility, and there are some other cities where you have not. So you should ask yourself why certain cities have this reaction and why others have not. I suppose that it is very complicated. I suppose that it has also to be to some relationship with the environment, with the rest of the nation, with a lot of things. But it's otherwise it's a mystery.
Thank you very much. Would anyone like to say something to that?
Yes. Okay. So in terms of the positives of tourism, I think maybe you're talking about the economics. I think it's a question of who owns what and where do the profits go. So the answer to that is follow the money. There are examples around the world of something called community homestay tourism, where local people are very invested in the tourism product, if you like, and welcome the tourists into their own homes. But again, that's going to come down to questions of power and who is running a village and what roles people have in that and who's distributing guests to which homes. So I'm not sure that there's necessarily a straightforward answer to that. And to the gentleman at the back about why don't we look at the guest culture, that's my favourite question, because we don't do enough of that, I don't think, in the study of tourism. The study of tourism has been dominated by the problems, and we need to understand, and I certainly, based on my research, would advocate for that, what is it that tourists are doing and saying, and they're not necessarily the problem. It's the people who own things, who try to guide the tourists, try to get them to do things. Noel mentioned earlier about the experience, and there's an issue around the transaction, the economic transaction being covered up. Well, certainly from my experience in Magaluf and Palma Nova, the reason why the tour operators were trying to befriend the tourists was precisely because when they sold them their products, it was so that the tourists didn't think that they were parting with money as such. It was their friend that they were negotiating with. They would go to nighttime entertainment where they're being sold the idea that something is free. Of course it's not free, it's been covered on the ticket price, but you're told that you're going to get a jug of free sangria. So follow the money to the owners, and that will help you understand where that economic benefit is lying.
Thank you. Yes?
Yes, I think our answers will go in very similar directions. First of all, like Hazel said, if you say about the positive aspects of tourism, it's probably not only economic, but of course we are always focused on the economic. And this is much harder to say in a big city like Barcelona, but because it's obvious that some people benefit economically, but these people who benefit economically don't necessarily live in the neighborhoods that face issues, and they don't necessarily even live in Barcelona. But you always need to have people who benefit locally. It would be impossible to have a tourism in Barcelona where there is no local benefits. That would be simply impossible. So the question is rather an issue of power. Who is benefiting and who is not benefiting, and why is there indeed a culture of protest? I think both questions are related in a very interesting way. I actually grew up in Bruges, which is also a tourism destination. It's a very small city, 40,000 people, millions of tourists every year. What they decided in Bruges, in my hometown, to actually deal with tourism is they actually sacrificed what they call the Golden Triangle. It is a part of the city that they sacrificed for tourism. So they basically decided this is an area and we will concentrate all the tourism activity there. There's almost no one living there. There's many people from the city working there. And so it's all concentrated in one place. And so it means that the neighborhoods where people are living, they have occasionally tourists passing by, but it's concentrated. And so there's many different ways, but of course the question about guest culture, I mean, what is the guest culture of Barcelona? What is the guest? And because Barcelona, it's a cosmopolitan city, there's so many different groups of people, so it's very hard to get a grasp of what that even means. And that's why, of course, you have people reacting differently. And we should always remember that whenever we see something in the news, this is a city with many inhabitants. Some people are very vocal, and so we know what they think. Other people, we actually have no idea what they think. And so I think we need much more research to actually understand how people position themselves.
Yes.
Yeah, and I will quickly add to this, again going in the same direction, that for me, I emphasize the importance of looking at power relations, because tourism consumes culture, but who is selling this culture? Sometimes, if you look, the mediators are selling something that does not belong to them. I've worked for many years in the tourist industry, and I worked with the very global tour operators, and the core of what they were selling, aside the accommodations and bus services and the guides, the core of what they're selling didn't belong to them. So then again, power relationship, management is essential, because if there was a structure that instead of following the money would make these big operators pay forward and, commit to improve what you were suggesting, the lives and the lives of the people and the society they consume, then it will be a win-win situation and much fair exchanges. And then again, another point about the guest culture. I chose the picture about by the restaurant. We do esmorzar de forquilla, we don't do brunch. Sometimes we leave aside the idea that educating the tourist is pointless. Honestly, I don't think so. Having worked as tourist mediator for many, many years, I think it is worth talking. People are interested, they are curious, and are also eager to change behavior. Are we ready to assume that people may not want to protect, will not come here anymore to protect Barcelona from massification? We have to be, to assume all the consequences, which is good, but again, opening up questions.
Thank you very much. We have about 10 more minutes, so we can have the last round of questions. We can have 3 questions. Yes, it's you now, and you, and we had someone here before, and you. We have time, we can go.
Hola, bé, volia agrair al CCCB que hagi proposat aquest debat, aquest seminari, perquè és un tema que ens preocupa molt a la ciutadania, és un tema que el parlem cada dia la gent que vivim a Barcelona i, com deia el senyor Salazar, moltes vegades políticament no tenim l'oportunitat de portar aquest debat als llocs polítics que és on realment els hauríem de portar i ja veiem la necessitat que tenim de fer-ho. I ens va bé també emmarcar aquesta problemàtica en un context més ampli i més teòric, perquè també necessitem un context teòric per emmarcar les situacions concretes. I bé, dit això, només puntualitzar que quan comentàveu els diferents tipus de turisme, crec que a Barcelona també hi ha un turisme molt important, no sé si es pot dir turisme, jo crec que sí, de reproducció assistida. Hi ha moltes persones que venen, moltes dones que venen per temes de reproducció assistida. Hi ha diverses clíniques a Barcelona que tot està en anglès, tot està... I crec que és un tema que cada vegada és més important. Suposo que hi ha altres ciutats, però Barcelona n'és una. I, com sempre, els temes de les dones queden més invisibilitzats dintre d'això. I després, sobre el tema de l'autenticitat, molt d'acord amb tot el que heu dit. Crec que no és l'autenticitat el que més ens preocupa a la població de Barcelona, sinó, com molt bé estàveu dient, totalment d'acord amb vosaltres dos, és una qüestió econòmica i política de qui van els beneficis i que la població sentim no només que no van als beneficis, sinó que som expulsades, la població, i els nostres fills, quan parlaves de la gent jove, clar, només hem pogut que revoltar-nos, perquè jo tinc 2 fills i un viu fora de Barcelona, perquè no pot pagar la vida aquí, i l'altre perquè viu en parella però ha marxat a casa als 30 anys. O sigui, tots sabem el problema que això suposa. I bé, dit això, l'única pregunta que volia fer era com veieu la sostenibilitat energètica del turisme, la viabilitat, perquè potser és un aspecte que no hem tocat, i de retruc també econòmic, perquè tot això es basa en un benestar, en una societat de benestar. L'altre dia que va marxar la llum, aquí ja va trontollar tot. Què passa? Què va passar amb el Covid? O sigui, una societat, les societats que basen, com és el nostre cas, la riquesa del turisme, és una situació molt precària.
Gràcies. Si pot ser, anem a les dues preguntes més, totes juntes, i després...
Moltes gràcies. Parlaré demà i ja tindré temps de parlar més extensament amb alguns temes, però voldria... El Noel ha fet una pinzellada molt interessant de la imatge turística de Barcelona i com l'antiturisme o el sobreturisme, o com li vulguem dir, és una part d'aquesta imatge. I m'ha vingut al cap, i voldria portar en el debat, la manifestació d'aquest estiu que es va produir a Barcelona, que no va ser una manifestació particularment important, molt més important va ser la de Màlaga o la de Canàries. No va ser una manifestació que hi hagi molta gent, va ser una manifestació molt pacífica, jo hi era, però em va sorprendre després la reacció mediàtica que hi va haver, que van aparèixer unes imatges a la BBC i una cosa que com a manifestant no vaig veure en cap moment, vull dir, va ser una cosa totalment irrellevant, però aquelles imatges van donar la volta al món. Hi va haver un debat en un d'aquests fòrums turístics d'acadèmics que jo no he posat mai, no he escrit mai en ma vida, però va haver un debat molt distorsionat d'acadèmics que encara ho feien més gran del que va ser, que venien a dir tonteries més grans que la Sagrada Família, de dir, bueno, Barcelona no t'estima, doncs no hi vagis. I jo vaig fer una intervenció dient, com em sorprèn més és com els acadèmics no es fan preguntes sobre la realitat, sinó sobre la ficció i tal. No? I vaig explicar, jo era allà, i em va semblar una manifestació molt poc rellevant, una ciutat que es fan manifestacions molt rellevants. No? I voldria portar aquest extrem, aquest cas de caricaturització extrema, també dels propis manifestants, en què tots els turistes són iguals, ja en tindrem intenció de parlar demà, no? Però em va semblar allò, com que Barcelona vol dir manifestació, per tant hem de posar aquesta imatge, no? I acabo aquí, un acadèmic molt important me va contestar d'una mala manera, jo mai m'ha agradat aquest acadèmic i encara em va agradar menys quan em va contestar, no? Vaig pensar que està sobrevalorat, però bueno, això és un comentari de cafè i aquí acabo.
No s'està gravant.
Gràcies. I l'última pregunta, sí.
Thank you so much. In order to I'm a local resident and I conduct a lot of research in Oceania. And I wonder, and I ask a lot of people in different regions of that side of the world, how do they manage with tourism, being from Barcelona, and they were fully aware of what are the sorts of problems we're dealing here. And the answer could be useful for the table, and we'll answer a little bit the governance problems you were mentioning me before, and also the reflection of the gentleman in the back was saying why our reactions here are different. The fact is, connecting this also with the last table that we had a fantastic academic that closed that table with the reflection that we have lost the right to decide if we want tourism or not. And that is what is happening here. The local community is not well represented because those tables are represent, the statement there is what sort of tourism do we want in the future, but never is any way we can decide if we want to keep on going, being a tourism destination. Is it compulsory that all neighborhoods, they have to modify in a certain level or the other? And what I got answer in New Zealand specifically, the indigenous people there, they said we will not sell our culture, so we decided no. So they are so empowered inside of the right structures, government and representations of local community that they decide no. So they had little spots where you can, if you're tourism, you want a sketch of tourism there, but the rest of the culture is for people. And it's a precious thing that we're losing here. And Catalans, we don't like to be defeated. We're struggling still with too much in our recent years. I'm not talking about contemporary history, but recent years. So we feel defeated and a little bit sold by our institutions as well. Because there's never the question, the boys never raise the question, can we really stop this? Do we all want this? Do we need this? They're telling us, yes, of course you need it. Otherwise Barcelona will be ruined. Otherwise Barcelona will be... Why? Why are we losing power in that level? Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. So, does anyone want to say something? Yeah.
Go. So, thank you for the knowledge about assisted reproduction tourism. I will add it to my list of over 300 types of tourism. You might be interested to know that there's also something called transplant tourism, in which people are paid from very poor regions of the world to travel somewhere and donate their kidneys, and then are kind of left after that without proper health care. To Pal, in terms of the demonstrations, I think one reason why they appear so much in the UK press is because Spain is such an important destination for UK tourists. And I agree that after the Barcelona protests last year, I think I know what discussion panel you may be talking about, that they were pretty stupid and they were about punishing the tourists. And that's one approach, but it's a bit like baking a loaf of bread and then telling people not to eat it. I mean, what's the point? If you're going to market somewhere, you want the tourists to come. So maybe you need to think about, I mean, I don't mean anybody personally here, but one needs to think about how places are marketed, by whom, and again, that power relationship and who's being asked if people want their homes and cities marketed. It's interesting that this year in the UK press, because it's already started, headlines are there will be protests, and that a quote from one potential protester is, "We want the tourists to fear us." And the right to decide, again, that is, that's down to political decision making. And again, I have a lot of sympathy for the issues that you are facing, but I would also ask all of you to consider, are you never tourists anywhere? Do you never go anywhere outside Barcelona? So how might you be affecting where you go? Thank you. Oh.
My answers surprisingly go in a similar direction. I want to thank you also for pointing out what is part of medical tourism. It would be interesting to know whether what you're describing, how recent that is. Because Ukraine used to be one of the places where many Europeans were going, but of course now that's a bit difficult. So it would be interesting to see the time scale. But you pointed also out another elephant in the room that is that many people dealing with tourism don't like to talk about, and it's everything related to the global environmental challenges. It's often not talked about. When they were having the big discussions, the Paris Agreement and other things on the climate change, the aviation industry for years and years and years managed to lobby itself out of all these deals. So they were able to argue that, flying, it doesn't affect anything related to the climate or whatever. So, and this is of course a very serious issue, that when we talk about leisure, and tourism is part of leisure, is something that is a bit sensitive. But of course it is a huge issue, and the global environmental challenges are also affecting Barcelona. I don't need to tell you, there's issues with water. Electricity will become very big. I mean, Spain was hit recently. This will increase because, of course, we are becoming more and more dependent on electricity. I mean, if we want to electrify all the cars, the fact that now many people are playing with artificial intelligence, not realizing the huge environmental damage that this is causing. So brace yourselves for the future that is coming. To briefly talk about your thing, one of the things that I find very alarming is that we live in a world where we are losing our sense for nuance and depth. So a lot of people reacting to things, and it's also journalists, but it's also academics, and I find that very alarming, is based on very superficial information, and then reacting as if you have all the depth in the world. And let me tell you a little anecdote. When I was doing research in Tanzania and I was interviewing people, when I would talk to journalists who would visit the country for 3 or 4 days, they would talk as if they understood the country, and they were like, wow, and I will explain you how this country is. When I then talked to people working for NGOs and organizations that had spent more time in the country, they were already far more nuanced. And then I also talked to missionaries that had spent in the country for over 40 years. And when I asked them about the country, they didn't want to answer me. They said, it's far too complex to explain. And so this is just something to actually keep in mind. But it is very frustrating when you know something about the situation, and then there are others who are using or are abusing their position of authority, be they journalists or be they academics, and then having a very skewed discussion. And I think I know what you were referring to, because I saw and I witnessed also those discussions. It's very, very disturbing. And the last point about the politics, I think you answered that in a very nice way, so I will keep quiet here.
Thank you very much.
Yes. Yeah. Thank you. I'll go home with a lot of reflections from this table. And as you have seen, I'm the one who asks questions and open up thought-provoking ideas without looking together. I'm an invitation. And my thing is, we have lost the right, what you said, we have lost the right to say if we want tourism or not, which is certainly a question that can be asked in an Aboriginal context. But when it comes to Barcelona, we always think of the here and now, But the tourist promotion of the city, as we have an expert in the room who can tell us about the history of promoting the city, is more than 150 years, but 200 years old. So already at the beginning of the 20th century, Barcelona was marked as a cosmopolitan hub. And at that point, it didn't serve an economic purpose, but it did serve a political one, because it wanted to project an image of strength. So let's go back and also contextualize, which doesn't mean that the result. What is different? The scale, of course. And then again, we need to involve communities to participate in the political project. And then I want to thank Hazel for this question about empathy for tourism. For me, is one big question. When we are like so easy to throw stones on tourists, are we able to empathize with ourselves when we travel? Or we never move? Do we never move? Are we able to see the tourist in ourselves? There is an ease of polarizing discourses nowadays. But if we exchange tourists as the subject with the migrant, all of a sudden, we all become right-wing populists. And this is scary. So this is why I think news and death are always important. If we say we don't want tourism anymore, we don't want migrants anymore, we're already saying this, and we are very worried about what is happening. So I think it's always important to give depth, to give nuance, and to also understand that sometimes these conservatives, protecting, can be conservative reaction and can easily border more right-wing populists, which are always very afraid of. Thanks.
Thank you very, very much. Well, it's 10 minutes past 1, so I think we're done for the moment, but we're still here for later on for questions on a more personal level. You're going to see us in the afternoon, tomorrow. So thank you all very much for being here. Hazel Andrews, Noel Salazar, Fabiola Mancinelli, for your contributions and your experiences. And let's have a great evening today. Thank you.